Thanks, Jack, Zane, Janice, Bill Shannon. I want to recognize this man, Bill Shannon, for just a moment, because today is his last Sunday. He's been our bass player for many, many Sundays, and he and his wife are leaving tomorrow to move out of state with their kids, and we send you with lots of blessings, Bill. Thank you. We have a guest speaker today, and I'm so excited to have him here, Reverend Mike Masando Hiraoka. Did I say that right? He is a ordained minister from Center for Spiritual Living. He has just moved back to Colorado, and we are so glad to have him back here at Columbine Unity. So let's give a warm welcome to Reverend Mike.
What's up, everybody? It's so good to be back. It has been quite the year for me. About 14 months ago, my wife and I moved to Portland, Oregon for a letter of call out there, and it was a year that was full of blessings. I feel really grateful to have been able to serve at that community, New Thought Center for Spiritual Living, to live in this majestic place of Oregon. The trees, oh my God, y'all, the trees there are just incredible. Just one of the most beautiful places I've ever lived. And one of the greatest blessings that came out of that past year was after a pretty long fertility journey, my wife got pregnant. Yeah. So, we didn't know if or when it was going to happen, as it can go sometimes with that. But when it did, and when she did get pregnant, everything changed. My brain changed, my priorities changed, everything changed. And we started to notice, and I really started to notice, I was just feeling sad as we started getting closer to the due date, and I felt this yearning to really be back in Colorado. This is where both of our families are. We have aunts, uncles, cousins, parents. I have a grandmother who will be a great-grandmother. I'm the oldest grandchild, so this will be her first great-grandchild, and we couldn't not come back to Colorado. So we just literally landed 10 days ago. We luckily were just renting out our townhome down the street in Arvada. So we just moved back in there. Our tenant's lease came up and we're just yeah, sorry, we're coming back. But it's just felt so good. I felt giddy just being back home. And so coming back here too just feels like a real homecoming, because I've always enjoyed coming here and spending time with y'all. So thanks so much for having me back. Today, the talk title is called Come Back. And when I was texting with Rev Sue, she was like, oh yeah, is that about you're coming back to Colorado? It is a little bit about that in the theme, but really it comes out of this Zen koan. My buddy had this framed and hung in his room in college. And how it goes, it simply said, when you lose your mind, come back. And that was it, when you lose your mind, come back. And all Zen koans, I didn't really know what it meant, right? Many Zen koans, they don't really tell you the truth or the spiritual truth. They give you just this little window into it, and kind of like a ticking time bomb, they just kind of sit with you until, in a moment, there's sort of this, revelation of the deeper meaning of what it is. I love how John Tarrant, who's a Zen practitioner and director of Pacific Zen Institute, this is how he talks about Zen koans. He says, a koan is a little healing story, a conversation, an image, a fragment of a song. It's something to keep you company, whatever you are doing. There's a tradition of koan study to transform your heart and the way you move in the world. Koans don't really explain things. Instead, they show you something by opening a gate. You walk through and you take a ride. It's like Russell Wilson said, let's ride. So they really are meant to be these earworms, that kind of get stuck in your head, that accompany you throughout your life, that have this opportunity to really wake you up to like a deeper meaning of something. And for me, I didn't, when I first heard this, I was confounded by what it meant, when you lose your mind, come back. It didn't say when you lose your mind, here are 5 steps for getting it back. When you lose your mind, dude, go and get that thing. You're gonna need it later at some point in the future. It just said, when you lose your mind, come back. And it wasn't until I had spent some time in India and I was learning a more formal meditation practice that the meaning all just came rushing in. It was almost way too obvious. And it was when I was receiving meditation instruction. And all of the meditation instruction that I received is some version of the following. I know there's a lot of different types of meditation, but in the Shambhala tradition that I learned, it kind of goes something like this. It's like, when you sit to meditate, you just take your seat. You don't focus on a candle. You don't focus on anything in particular. You simply just sit in the silence, and you begin to breathe. You don't overly focus on your breath. You just kind of pay attention to anything that's happening in the room. You have a downward gaze, and you just sit, and you breathe. And when you notice your mind wandering off into some to-do list that you have to do, or some regret that you have from the past, or some stupid thing someone said on the internet that pissed you off, or whatever fantasy that you go into, which you will, just simply come back to your breath and come back to the present moment. And it was right when I received that instruction, the ticking time bomb just went off in my mind. Of course, when you lose your mind, come back. That Zen koan was simply an instruction on how to meditate. And little did I know that my buddy in college had this on his wall, but he had never actually meditated before. He just found this in some thrift store and thought it was cool. But apparently he knew what it meant enough to actually hang it up in his room. But this practice of coming back, right? This coming back to the present moment, this just coming back has totally changed my life, Because everything that happens on the seat, when you're on the meditation cushion, that's simply just a metaphor for the rest of your life. How often do we just get distracted in our life? I mean, we are living in the age of distraction. There's not 2 seconds that go by where something doesn't just pop up on my phone and I'm just like a squirrel. I'm just totally distracted by everything that's going on. There are so many things that bring me away from just being in the present moment. There's so many things that distract me. There's so many things that come up as worry or anxieties of things that I have to do, or that text that I have to respond to, or these billion emails that I haven't gotten to, or this thing that's pissing me off in the world that I'm totally upset about. There's so many things that just pull me away from my center, from just being here, from being present to what's in front of me. And I think now that I'm going to be having a kid, it's coming up for me a lot, because I'm man, I cannot be like that around my baby. I cannot be distracted and staring and doom scrolling Twitter on my phone when there's this little kid in front of me, right? They did those little infant experiments where the child knows when you're not paying attention to them, when you're not responding to them. And they freak out when you're not doing that, when you're not being fully present with them. It actually hinders their development. It impacts their attachment that is so deeply necessary, especially in those early years, right? And I think literally we never grow out of that. As human beings, I need that too. There's nothing worse than when you're talking to someone and they're just responding to texts on their phone, or you're at the dinner table and everyone's just we're not even interacting with each other. We're just looking. I usually am just looking up sports and stuff, what's going on my fantasy team or whatever. But there's so many things that pull us away. And what I love about this practice is it's just simply just this practice of being human, of coming back to the present moment. And what I notice is it doesn't matter how many times we come back. We're not better or worse whether we come back in a sitting session 1 or 1,000 times. Like the whole point is just the practice of knowing that like no matter how far we've roamed or how many distractions we've gone into, we can always come back. Like I remember talking to my meditation instructor when I first started meditating about this, because he'd always check in and like we'd meet once a month or once a week when I first started meditating. He's like, so how are things going? And like after the first couple of weeks, I was like, dude, I do not think I'm cut out for this meditation thing. I am horrible at this. My mind must have wandered off like 1,000 times in just the session we had today. And I was like, yesterday, literally, all I was doing was trying to get this stupid Britney Spears song out of my head. My entire meditation practice for the entire session was like, oh, I was just like, had that song Toxic in my brain. Now it's gonna be in your brain. And the entire session, all I was doing was just trying to like get that song out of my head. I was like, I'm not doing it right. And he just chuckled at me. I remember his name was John. He was a teacher here at Hiraoka. And he was like, listen, Mike, it doesn't matter if you come back to the breath 1 or 1,000 times when you sit. Like it's all the same. The point isn't to be perfect at this practice. The point is to practice. If you're only coming back once in a session, that's when I worry. That's when I worry. If you're telling me that you've got this mastered after 1 week, that's when I'm going to worry about you. And Pema Chodron, who's also a student of Chogyam Trungpa, who started the Chambala tradition, she talks about this in her book too, The Wisdom of No Escape. She talks about how she struggled with spiritual practice and thought she was just failing at it all the time. She said, once I had the opportunity to talk with my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, about the fact I was not able to do my practice properly. I had just started the Vajrayana practices and was supposed to be visualizing, and I couldn't visualize anything. I tried and tried, but there was just nothing at all. I felt like a fraud doing this practice because it didn't feel natural to me. I was quite miserable because everybody else seemed to be having all kinds of visualizations and doing very well. He said, I'm always suspicious of the ones who say everything's going well. If you think that things are going well, then it's usually just some kind of arrogance. It's too easy. If it's too easy for you, you just relax. You don't make a real effort, and therefore you never find out what it is to be fully human. So he encouraged me by saying that as long as you have these kinds of doubts, your practice will be good. When you begin to think that everything is just perfect and feel complacent and superior to others, watch out. Well, I love that, right? And it reminded me when I was learning about the story of the Buddha and his enlightenment, right? The story goes the Buddha was just, chilling under the Bodhi tree or whatever he was doing, sitting there for weeks, months, I don't know how long. But they talk about the moments before he attained enlightenment, this deity of Mara, which is the god or goddess of illusion, came in and just began to attack him with his deepest fears, the things that brought him the most anxiety, the things that terrified him the most. So all of his deepest stuff, all his deepest insecurities, all those fears, he was just attacking him with. And the Buddha had to deal with that. And he just put his hand on the ground, stay centered, began to breathe, came back to his breath. And then he, was like, all right, well, that's not going to work. And I'm going to tempt you. He put all his biggest distractions, all of his biggest desires and lusts, all of the things that bring us, kind of out of the joy of the present moment, all these things that we're always just yearning for but can never have, all the things that make us feel like our life isn't good enough, all the things that really bring us away from just being right here now. And what did he do? He put his hand on the ground, he breathed, and he came back to the present moment. And it was in that, it was right before he was really faced with all of his stuff, all of his distractions, all of his deepest lusts and desires, all of his deepest fears and worries and anxieties, that he became enlightened. And then, it was kind of reading this, I can remember reading that and getting the deeper meaning of that. It's kind of reading Us magazine. I was oh, the Buddha is just like us, man. He's just like us. He's not this perfect person in the world. He's not this person, there's not this enlightened being that I will never be able to be like. He was dealing with the same stuff we were. It was just like a different time. And he had different distractions and different fears than we do, right? And it's just this reminder to me, of like, no matter how far we feel from our spiritual center, our home, right? No matter how far we've roamed, no matter how far we've let someone else's story of us get into our mind and make us believe that's the truth of who we are, no matter how much we've let fear or anxiety rule our life, no matter how much we've allowed some emptiness that we feel inside of, we have to attain this or be this or do this in order to really feel like we're doing what we're supposed to do, or we can have any sense of worth or value in the world, no matter how far we've roamed from this truest truth, like Rev Sue's prayer really reminded us this authentic self, like this place within us that recognizes like, hey, right now, exactly as we are, just breathing, like that's enough. Like our value is not dependent on anything but this just being here, just being alive. And anything we do outside of that, that's just like fun bonus stuff that we get to do as being human to explore this amazing thing called life. But when it comes to our value, our worthiness of just being here on the planet, right here in 2022, which it is a hard time to be a human being in this 2022. It is a crazy time to be alive. What it's a reminder of is that we can always come back, no matter how far we've roamed from that remembrance. Because I think it is a remembrance. It's something that we all know deeply. There's always some part of us that knows that right here, right now, like that's all we will ever need. Just this breath, just this moment, just this being here together. That's the truest truth of who we are. It's stupidly simple, right? And this practice is just the remembrance that like even the Buddha, he forgot that. And he had to come back. He had to touch the earth in order to come back to that, right? And so I think, this coming home to Colorado has just been this really deep metaphor for that, I think it's reminded me how many times I've like ventured or just wandered far from the home of myself, right? Where I think I've needed to achieve something, or I think I've needed to search for something outside of myself in order to feel some sort of sense of worth, of value, or like a success in my life. Or how much I've let someone else's story of me, tell me who I am. And the coming home, like this feeling of being home is just like, oh yeah, that's all BS. I don't need any of that. All I need is just this moment. All I need is just the people that I love. All I need is to be deeply present enough to not take that for granted. All I need is right here. All I'll ever need is this breath. All I'll ever need is this earth and my ability to put my hand on the earth so it can remind me who I am. That's all I'll ever need. And this, to me, is the closest I've come to feeling the presence of the divine. I can't pretend to know what that actually is. I know that each one of us is probably here trying to figure that out. Oh, seeker, we're all spiritual seekers. But I do know that we all also have this ability, no matter how far we've roamed from ourselves, just to come back. Just come back to the presence of who we are. Come back to that spiritual truth of who we are, And I know that we do this individually, but we can also do this collectively too, right? We do this as humans, as individuals. Like I'm going to come back to this spiritual truth, this principle of love. Like, oh yeah, that's me. This principle of peace. Oh yeah, that's the truest truth of who I am. But we also do this as like, societies, organizations. This is why we have a vision and mission. Our vision and mission helps us remember like who we are as an organization and what work we're up to in the world. And we often will start mission and vision drifting, right? And we'll start pulling resources and time and energy into projects that may not fully align with what we're actually up to. And so we got to come back and we got to begin pulling our resources back and we pull it in. And that's what makes organizations succeed. They get really good what they know that they're about. And societies do the same thing. I think the United States of America, this country, we have had to come back to this principle of liberty, of life, of freedom, over and over and over again, right? I mean, let's be real. When the founding fathers wrote that Declaration of Independence, and they declared freedom and equality for all, there were hundreds of thousands of descendants from the continent of Africa that were enslaved at that time. When they talked about free, like that we're living in a democracy, right? And that we're all making the decisions, 6% of the population was even eligible to vote at that time. 6%. Women wouldn't gain the right to vote for 150 years. We're a nation that has interned Japanese Americans and put them in camps, that denied citizenship for all Asians from 1882 to 1965. We still, to this day, are coming back to this principle of liberty over and over again. But I believe that's the whole point. I believe no matter how far we have roamed as a country, no matter if it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, that the whole point of this whole thing, of having that Constitution, of having this visionary document, is so that we can come back to it, right? Even now, as yet again we are fighting for the autonomy and dignity of women's bodies, we come back. We come back to it. And so that every time that we as a country, it's easy to lose hope sometimes in this country. I don't know where everyone sits on the political aisle, but I can lose faith a lot, especially how divided it feels sometimes. But I do feel as a country that we still have these values instilled in us of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Of freedom and equality for all. And our job, each generation, every time we come around, is to help to interpret that and to bring that to more and more people, especially if we're ones that have had the privilege of really having those liberties, and we witness that perhaps there's others that have not, that we say, hey, perhaps this is not being manifested in the way that we would like to see, but we can come back. We can come back to this principle. We can come back to this value. And we can, in our own way, as best as we can, do all we can to ensure that happens in our lifetime, in this little chunk of time that we have on this planet, to be a person that holds this value of liberty, this holds this value of freedom, this holds this value of equality and justice, and ensure that that happens for more and more people, right? And have the hope for that. And not to say that the system is broken, even if it feels like it is. But there's a value and a foundational document that can help move us forward. So we do this as people, right? We come back to this truth of who we are. But we can do this as a society, as a nation too. We come back into this remembrance of this is who we are, and this is how we stand for. And it has not been perfect, but we're helping to create a more perfect union, right? Every single time we come around. So I'm happy to be back home. And I know, and I hope that each one of us, right, as we navigate this 2022, that we remember that coming back home is the easiest thing that we can possibly do. That it's something that's inherent within us. We always know how to come back to the breath. It's as easy as just breathing and remembering. You can always come back to the truth of who we are. It's just easy as breathing and remembering. And can we always come back to community as well? Actually, last night, as I close it out today, last night, I saw that right at the top of the Unity of Columbine website, it says, come back to Columbine. And it's true, I actually just talked to someone today who hadn't been back since the beginning of the pandemic. And I get it, right? Like, a lot of us are more at risk or have people that are more at risk. Perhaps we've just changed a lot. Perhaps we just like having Sunday mornings free again and we're not going back. Listen, I'm not going to judge. I get it. But I also know, right? I also know that it is much easier to give in to those temptations and fears of Mara. I am much more susceptible to believing truths that someone else has told me rather than the truest truth of myself. I am much more able to fall into the distractions of life and let those be the most important things when I'm by myself, when I'm isolated, when I'm trying to do it on my own. And I know that healing happens, integrity and accountability happens, inspiration, being inspired by all these people around me, as well as Reverend Sue, that happens in community. Like that happens when we're together. That happens in Sangha, right? Among fellow travelers along the path that are trying to awaken in the same way you are. Like-minded folks that are all here trying to live this spiritual life together. So if you're watching online, hey, come back. Come back, y'all. So thank you so much for having me again. It's so good to be home. I love you all.